you ever wondered what happens after a big victory? When the celebration's over and the really hard work of building something new has to start, especially when you're starting from scratch in the middle of nowhere. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. A story of survival, trust, and some surprisingly modern leadership challenges.
All right, let's jump right in. Our source for this is the book of Exodus, chapters 16 through 18. We're going to unpack this incredible ancient story and uncover a series of, well, foundational tests. These tests didn't just shape a brand new nation, they also offer some pretty timeless lessons on what it really takes to lead and build a community. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at that initial big crisis right after they gain their freedom. Then we'll get into these really unique tests involving food and water. From there, we'll see how they handled their first real external threats before turning to the internal challenge of just building a functional society. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at what all of this can teach us today.
Okay, so try to picture this. It's been exactly 1 month since that miracle at the Red Sea. The Israelites are finally free from Egypt. But that initial feeling of excitement, it's fading, and it's fading fast. It's being replaced by the grim, harsh reality of being in the middle of a barren wilderness.
And this is where things get really interesting from a psychological standpoint. The people start complaining, and they're not just grumbling. They're saying they wish they had just died back in Egypt, where at least they had full stomachs. Just think about that for a second. Their hunger right now is so overwhelming that it's making them romanticize a past where they were literally slaves. Their freedom suddenly seems worthless.
So, this huge crisis of hunger leads to a divine response. But this wasn't just about dropping off a food delivery. No, this was about something much, much deeper. It was designed to be a lesson, a real test of trust and obedience.
The help that arrived actually came in 2 parts. First, quail were miraculously blown in by the winds, which took care of the meat situation. But their daily food, their staple, was this strange substance they called manna. And that name literally means, "What is it?" in Hebrew. Kind of funny, right? This so-called bread from heaven would end up being their food for the next 40 years.
Now here's the kicker. The manna came with a very specific set of rules, and these rules were the real test. First, you could only gather enough for that 1 day. That's it. Second, you couldn't hoard it. If you tried to save it for the next day, it would just spoil. This forced everyone to trust that there would be more tomorrow. And then there were the last 2 rules, which set up the whole idea of a Sabbath, a day of rest. You'd collect a double portion on day 6, so you wouldn't have to work on day 7. It was a lesson in faith baked right into their daily bread.
Okay, so the story keeps building from here. They've dealt with hunger, but now they're facing a crisis of thirst, which is immediately followed by their very first military threat. You can just feel how the tests are getting more and more intense.
And what do you know? Even after seeing the miracle of the manna, that desperation for survival just eats away at their trust again. They completely corner Moses, demanding water. And the solution is another jaw-dropping miracle. Moses is told to strike a rock, and when he does, water gushes out, saving the entire nation from dying of thirst.
Right after that, with no time to even catch their breath, they face their next big challenge: war. A hostile tribe, the Amalekites, launches an attack. But the battle that happens next is just bizarre. Victory isn't about military strategy. Instead, as long as Moses keeps his hands raised up on a nearby hill, the Israelites start winning. The second his arms get tired and drop, the enemy starts to gain the upper hand. It got so bad that his allies Aaron and Hur had to physically hold his arms up for him until sunset just to secure the victory.
And to mark this incredible moment, Moses builds an altar. He names it Yahweh Nisi, which means "the Lord is my banner." The name was a powerful symbol, right? It declared that God is the standard, the flag, the banner of victory you rally to when you trust in Him, especially when you're facing down your enemies.
So we've seen them face these huge external threats: hunger, thirst, war. But now the focus shifts to a critical problem on the inside. Moses' father-in-law, a man named Jethro, shows up for a visit and immediately sees that the way the nation is being led is completely and totally unsustainable.
What Jethro sees is Moses, sitting by himself, acting as the sole judge for literally hundreds of thousands of people. He's listening to every single dispute, big and small, from sunrise to sunset. I mean, it's a classic case of leadership burnout. Moses had become a bottleneck, and the whole system was just grinding to a halt. Jethro, who's a pretty wise leader in his own right, offers a solution. But first, he lays out the qualifications for any new leaders. And I want you to notice what he focuses on here. It's not about their resume, or their skills, or their experience. It's all about their character. He says, find people who are honest, who are trustworthy, and, get this, who are incorruptible. People who actively hate dishonest gain.
And here is the system he proposed. It's brilliant because it's so simple and so effective. You basically create a hierarchy. You appoint leaders over groups of thousands, then hundreds, then 50s, and even tens. All the everyday little arguments get handled at the lowest level. And only the really tough, complex cases make their way up the ladder to Moses at the top. It's basically Delegation 101, and this simple advice probably saved their entire social structure from collapsing. So you might be thinking, okay, interesting story, but why does any of this matter to me? Well, because the principles laid out here, especially in this last part about leadership, are just as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago in that desert.
The big takeaway here is that these standards for leadership aren't just some historical fun fact. The idea that leaders should be chosen based on their integrity, their honesty, and their respect for something bigger than themselves, that is a powerful and, frankly, timeless piece of advice.
And that really brings us to our final thought for you to chew on. In our world, with all its complex politics and business and community life, what does it truly mean to be incorruptible? Just take a second to think about it. What does a leader who genuinely hates dishonest gain actually look like in your company, your community, or even your country today? It's an ancient question that feels more urgent than ever. Thanks for joining us.